The stars looked different when you could travel between them. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Starship Endeavour and watched the swirling colors of hyperspace fade away as they dropped back into normal space. Before them hung a massive space station that looked like a crystal flower blooming in the darkness. This was Nexus Prime, the heart of the Galactic Coalition, and Jake could barely believe humans had finally made it here. "Impressive sight," said Dr. Lisa Bennett from beside him. She was the ship's chief science officer and had spent years studying alien technology from the few signals Earth had managed to intercept. Nothing had prepared her for seeing Coalition architecture in person. The station stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, its surfaces covered in materials that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Colonel Ryan Phillips checked his weapons display one more time. The military advisor had argued against this mission from the beginning. He believed humans should have built up their defenses before making contact with aliens who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. But the politicians back on Earth had been eager to join the galactic community, and here they were. Amy Carter worked at the communications station, trying to establish contact with the station's traffic control. The young specialist had learned 17 different alien languages in preparation for this mission, but the actual sounds coming through the speakers were unlike anything in her studies. The aliens seemed to communicate through a mixture of harmonics and mathematical equations that her equipment could barely translate. "Incoming transmission," Amy announced. "They're acknowledging our approach and assigning us a docking bay." She paused as more data flowed across her screen. "Captain, they're also sending what appears to be a list of protocols we need to follow while aboard the station." Jake nodded and took his seat. The next few hours would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. Earth had achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 years ago, and they were still learning how to use it properly. Their ships were crude compared to what they had seen in long-range scans of alien vessels, but they worked well enough to get humans to the stars. The docking process took longer than expected. The station's automated systems seemed confused by the Endeavor's design, and traffic control had to guide them manually to their assigned berth. Jake could hear the frustration in the alien controllers' voices even through the translation software. They clearly were not impressed with human engineering. When the airlock finally opened, Jake led his team into a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. The walls were made of some transparent material that showed the vast expanse of space beyond, and the floor felt soft under their feet, despite looking solid. Waiting for them were 3 figures that represented the major powers of the Galactic Coalition. The first was Zephyrian Chancellor Zix Thara, whose body appeared to be made entirely of living crystal. Light moved through her form in patterns that Jake's translator said indicated amusement, though not the friendly kind. She stood nearly 3 meters tall and seemed to examine the humans like a scientist studying insects. Beside her stood Kraxon, Warlord Vexthal, a massive creature covered in metallic scales. His species had conquered half the galaxy through military might before joining the Coalition, and his presence filled the corridor with an aura of barely controlled violence. 4 arms crossed over his chest as he looked down at the human delegation, with obvious disappointment. The third figure was harder to look at directly. The ethereal high mind existed as a shimmering field of energy that occasionally took on a vaguely humanoid shape, this being claimed to be thousands of years old and spoke in concepts rather than words, making conversation difficult even with advanced translation equipment. "So these are the humans," Chancellor Zix Thara said, her voice creating musical chimes that the translator converted into words. "I expected them to be larger given their reputation for violence." Warlord Vexthal laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Their weapons are primitive projectile launchers. I have seen children's toys that are more advanced." The ethereal high mind pulsed with colors that the translator interpreted as condescension. "Their lifespans are remarkably brief. Most of them will be dead before they can even begin to understand the complexities of galactic civilization. Jake felt his team tense behind him, but he kept his expression neutral. This was exactly what Earth's diplomats had prepared him for. The aliens would test human resolve and dignity before deciding how to treat them. "We appreciate the opportunity to join the galactic community," he said carefully. "Humanity has much to learn, but we also hope to contribute what we can." Chancellor Zixathara's crystalline form flickered with what might have been laughter. "Contribute? You have barely mastered fire compared to our technology. Your entire species exists in a single star system while we span thousands of worlds. Perhaps we should assign them to monitor cargo shipments," suggested Warlord Vexthal. "It would keep them busy and out of the way while we handle important matters." The ethereal high mind agreed with a pulse of dismissive energy. "Grant them provisional observer status. They can watch and learn until they either evolve or fade away as so many young species do." Jake swallowed his pride and accepted the insult, disguised as an offer. Humanity needed a foothold in galactic society, even if it meant starting at the bottom. The aliens clearly saw humans as nothing more than curious primitives who would probably destroy themselves before becoming a real threat to anyone. As they were led deeper into the station, Jake wondered if the aliens would ever regret underestimating humanity. 5 years had passed since humanity's humiliating introduction to the Galactic Coalition, and Commander Sarah Blake stood in her office aboard the human diplomatic station, watching cargo ships drift past her window. The station orbited a minor trade world on the edge of Coalition space, far from the important political centers where real decisions were made. It was exactly where the aliens wanted humans to stay. Sarah had replaced Jake Morrison as head of human diplomatic operations. After he retired in frustration, the former captain had grown tired of being ignored in coalition meetings and dismissed by alien officials who treated humans like children playing at being grown-ups. Sarah understood his anger, but she had different plans for dealing with their situation. Admiral Kevin Ross entered her office carrying a datapad filled with shipping reports. The human fleet now consisted of 12 ships, all assigned to patrol trade routes that the major powers considered too boring to handle themselves. It was menial work, but Kevin had learned to see opportunities where others saw only tedium. "The monthly trade statistics," Kevin said, setting the pad on Sarah's desk. "Cargo volume is up 15% over last year, but the coalition officials still treat our reports like homework assignments from school children." Sarah smiled and activated her secure communication system. "Dr. Marcus Webb, please report." "To my office." Within minutes, the door opened to admit a thin man whose appearance suggested he spent more time reading than sleeping. Marcus led the Human Research Division, which officially studied alien trade patterns, but actually did much more than that. "Show him what we've learned," Sarah told Kevin, who pulled up a holographic display showing the sector they patrolled. What appeared to be a simple map of trade routes was actually something much more sophisticated. Marcus studied the display with growing excitement. "We've identified weakness patterns in 3 different alien military doctrines, mapped the resource, dependencies of 12 coalition worlds, and traced the communication networks that connect the major power centers." "How?" Kevin asked. "The aliens barely acknowledge we exist." "That's exactly why we can learn so much," Sarah explained. "They talk freely around us because they don't think we're smart enough to understand what we're hearing. Agent Claire Davis has been building our intelligence network for 3 years now." As if summoned by her name, Claire appeared in the doorway. The intelligence officer looked like any other human diplomat, but she had managed to place observers in dozens of locations throughout Coalition space. Her network gathered information that the aliens shared without thinking, never suspecting, that humans might use it for anything important. "The situation between the Zephyrians and Kraxons is getting worse," Claire reported. "Trade Representative Kirthan made some insulting comments about Kraxon honor during yesterday's commercial negotiations. Warlord Vexthal is demanding an apology that Chancellor Zixathara refuses to give." Sarah nodded. She had been watching this conflict develop for months. The Zephyrians controlled the crystal formations that powered much of the galaxy's technology, while the Kraxons manufactured the weapons that kept order on Coalition worlds. Neither side could afford to lose access to what the other provided, but their pride was pushing them toward a confrontation that would hurt everyone. "What does the Ethereal Collective think?" Marcus asked. "High Mind Veltaros is organizing a traditional mediation ceremony," Claire answered. "It will take 6 months to complete all the ritual preparations, and even then, success isn't guaranteed. The Ethereals believe that time heals all wounds, but sometimes problems need faster solutions." Kevin pulled up intelligence reports showing military movements on both sides. If this turns into shooting, it could split the coalition apart. Half the galaxy would have to choose between crystal technology and military protection. Sarah studied the data for several minutes before making her decision. "Lieutenant Colonel Brian Murphy is observing the negotiations as our official representative. Send him a message through secure channels." Brian Murphy had been attending coalition meetings for 2 years, officially recording human observations that no one bothered to read. What the aliens didn't know was that Brian had studied every major diplomatic crisis in human history and understood how pride and economics could destroy civilizations. He also understood how simple solutions could prevent complex disasters. 3 days later, Brian requested permission to address the Trade Negotiation Committee. The alien officials were surprised that a human would want to speak, but they agreed out of curiosity more than respect. Brian's presentation lasted only 10 minutes, but it changed everything. Instead of focusing on who was right or wrong, Brian proposed a solution that addressed both sides' real concerns. The Zephyrians needed guaranteed access to Kraxon trade, routes for crystal shipments, while the Kraxons needed assurance that their weapon orders would be filled without political interference. Brian suggested creating a joint oversight committee that would handle disputes before they became public insults. The idea was so simple that both sides felt foolish for not thinking of it themselves. Within a week, they had signed an agreement that resolved their immediate crisis and established procedures for handling future problems. The galaxy's major powers were amazed that a conflict which seemed destined for warfare had been solved so quickly. "Beginner's luck," Chancellor Zixthera declared when asked about the human contribution. "They stumbled onto an obvious solution that we would have reached ourselves given more time." Warlord Vexthal was less dismissive. "Perhaps these humans are not as simple as they appear," he told his advisors. "Their representative understood our concerns better than some of our own negotiators." The Ethereal Collective was the most thoughtful in their response. High Mind Veltaros spent days meditating on the implications of Brian's success before reaching a conclusion. "The humans think differently than we do. This could be useful or dangerous, depending on how they develop." Sarah read all the intelligence reports with satisfaction. For the first time since joining the coalition, humans had demonstrated value beyond their assigned role as observers. More importantly, they had done it in a way that made the aliens question their assumptions about human capabilities. "What's our next move?" Kevin asked during their weekly strategy meeting. "We continue learning and watching," Sarah replied. "The aliens still see us as lucky children who solved one simple problem. They have no idea how much we really understand about their weaknesses and dependencies." Marcus activated his research displays, showing economic models that would have impressed coalition analysts if they had bothered to look at them. "We're mapping every critical resource flow and communication link in this sector. When the next crisis comes, we'll be ready." Claire updated her intelligence summary with new information from across coalition space. "I have observers watching 17 different potential conflict zones. The aliens are so focused on maintaining their superiority that they're missing obvious problems building up around them." Sarah looked out her window at the endless stream of cargo ships carrying goods between alien worlds. Each ship represented connections and dependencies that the coalition took for granted. Humans were learning to see patterns that the aliens couldn't recognize because they were too close to their own systems. The galaxy's great powers continued to treat humanity as insignificant, but that was about to change. The first reports came from the Rim worlds, messages that cut off mid-transmission and left behind only silence. Coalition Fleet Command initially dismissed these incidents as equipment failures or communication problems, but Captain Alex Turner felt a cold certainty that something terrible was happening in the outer sectors. Alex commanded the human patrol ship Defiant, one of the newer vessels in humanity's modest fleet. His ship was assigned to protect the research station at Kepler Station, where Dr. Rachel Green led a team studying alien technology patterns. The station was considered so unimportant that it didn't even rate a coalition defense force, but Alex took his responsibilities seriously regardless of what others thought. "Another Rim world has gone dark," reported Communications Officer Pete Davis from his station. "That makes 7 systems in the past month with no response to coalition hail attempts." Navigation specialist Linda Torres pulled up a star chart showing the affected areas. "The pattern looks random, but there's something strange about the timing. Each attack happens exactly 72 hours after the previous one, as if someone is working from a schedule." Alex studied the display with growing concern. His crew might be human, but they had learned to think like coalition citizens over the past 5 years of service. The military patterns they were seeing suggested an organized threat rather than random pirate attacks or natural disasters. Dr. Rachel Green contacted the ship from her laboratory on Kepler Station. "Captain, we've been analyzing the last transmissions from the dead systems. There are energy signatures in the background that don't match anything in coalition databases." "What kind of energy?" Alex asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. "Something that seems to absorb conventional weapons fire and use it to grow stronger." The defending ships report hitting their targets directly, but the attackers kept getting more powerful instead of taking damage. Alex felt his stomach tighten. Coalition military doctrine was based on overwhelming firepower and superior technology. If conventional weapons were useless against these attackers, the galaxy's greatest military minds would be facing something they didn't understand. 2 days later, Alex's fears became reality when long-range sensors detected unknown ships approaching. Kepler Station. The vessels were unlike anything in coalition records, appearing as dark shadows that seemed to bend light around themselves. They moved with purpose and coordination that suggested intelligence, but their design was completely alien even by galactic standards. "Red alert!" Alex ordered, knowing that his single ship faced impossible odds. The Defiant was a patrol vessel designed to handle pirates and smugglers, not mysterious enemies that could destroy entire star systems. But his orders were clear, and Alex had never abandoned his post regardless of the danger. The attack began with weapons that turned space itself into a weapon. Coalition ships typically relied on energy shields and armored hulls for protection, but these defenses proved useless against technology that bypassed physical barriers entirely. Alex watched his shield readings fluctuate wildly as reality seemed to twist around his ship. "Conventional weapons are having no effect," reported Weapons Officer Greg Martinez. "Our missiles are being absorbed before they can detonate, and our energy beams are somehow feeding power to their ships instead of damaging them." Alex made a decision that would have horrified coalition military commanders. Instead of following standard engagement protocols, he ordered his crew to implement tactics based on ancient human military history adapted for space combat. Where aliens relied on predictable patterns and overwhelming force, humans used deception and unpredictability. "Cut all power to non-essential systems," Alex commanded. "Make it look like we're disabled, then drift toward the asteroid field using momentum only." The Void Hunters, as the crew had started calling them, approached the apparently crippled human ship with what seemed like curiosity rather than aggression. Their dark vessels moved in perfect formation, following patterns that suggested they were following programmed instructions rather than making tactical decisions. "Now," Alex whispered, when the enemy ships were close enough. The Defiant suddenly came alive with full power, launching a spread of kinetic projectiles and explosive charges that had been disguised as debris. The human ship spun and twisted through space in ways that no coalition captain would ever attempt, using gravity and momentum as weapons. The Void Hunters seemed confused by tactics they hadn't encountered before. Their perfect formations broke, apart as they tried to track a target that refused to behave according to expected patterns. More importantly, the kinetic weapons were having an effect because they operated on different principles than energy-based coalition technology. Dr. Rachel Green worked frantically in her laboratory as the battle raged around Kepler Station. Her research into alien technology had given her insights that coalition scientists lacked because they were too specialized in their own approaches. Where alien research focused on perfecting existing methods, human science embraced experimentation and adaptation. "Captain, I think I understand what we're fighting," Rachel announced over the communication system. "These entities use some kind of adaptive technology that learns from each attack and develops countermeasures. That's why coalition weapons become useless so quickly." "How do we beat something that adapts?" Alex asked while ordering another course change that sent the Defiant diving through a debris field at dangerous speed. "By being more adaptable than they are," Rachel replied. "Human tactics work because we don't follow predictable patterns. These things can learn to counter cracks in firepower or Zephyrian coordination, but they can't adapt to something that changes faster than they can process." Alex grinned despite the desperate situation. "Helm, prepare for evasive pattern chaos. Weapons? Load everything we have left and fire on my mark. We're going to show these things what human unpredictability really means." The final engagement lasted only minutes, but it demonstrated something that would change the galaxy's understanding of warfare. The Defiant danced through space like a ship possessed, changing direction and tactics so rapidly that the Void Hunters couldn't establish target locks. Human weapons, primitive by coalition standards, proved effective because they operated on principles the enemy hadn't encountered before. When the last Void Hunter ship finally retreated, Alex and his crew found themselves looking at something unprecedented. They had achieved the first coalition victory against an enemy that had destroyed every other force sent against them. More importantly, they had done it using methods that the galaxy's advanced civilizations would never have considered. News of the human victory spread through coalition space faster than official reports could travel. Military commanders who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant suddenly wanted detailed analyses of the battle. Scientists who had ignored human research began requesting copies of Dr. Rachel Green's studies on adaptive technology. Chancellor Zix Thara was forced to admit that human tactics had succeeded where Zephyrian telepathic coordination had failed. "Perhaps these creatures possess a form of chaotic intelligence that makes them unpredictable," she told the Coalition Council. Warlord Vexthal was more direct in his assessment. "The humans fight like nothing we have ever seen. Their methods seem insane by our standards, but they achieved victory where our finest warriors were destroyed." The Ethereal Collective spent days analyzing recordings of the battle before High Mind Veltaros reached a disturbing conclusion. The humans approach warfare the same way they approach everything else, with adaptation and innovation rather than adherence to established principles. This makes them either very dangerous or very valuable, depending on whose side they choose. Alex Turner and his crew became reluctant celebrities throughout Coalition space, but more importantly, they had proven that humanity possessed capabilities that the galaxy's greatest powers lacked. The Void Hunters were still out there, still attacking rim worlds with increasing frequency, but now the Coalition had hope that they might be defeated. The question was whether alien pride would allow them to learn from species they had spent 5 years treating as primitive observers. The Void Hunter attacks had spread across 12 star systems by the time the Coalition finally swallowed its pride and asked for human assistance. General Patricia Kane stood in the Coalition war room on Nexus Prime, surrounded by alien military. commanders who still struggled to hide their reluctance at working with what they considered primitive allies. Patricia had been chosen to lead the Joint Task Force specifically because of her reputation for unconventional thinking. The former Marine had spent her career studying asymmetric warfare and adaptation strategies, making her one of the few human officers who understood how to integrate different military philosophies into effective combat units. The enemy has demonstrated ability to counter our standard battle formations, reported Zephyrian War Coordinator Sylvana, her crystalline form pulsing with frustrated energy patterns. Our telepathic battle coordination becomes useless when they can predict and neutralize our group tactics. Kraxan Battle Commander Torvak slammed a massive fist on the strategy table. Overwhelming firepower has always been the key to victory, but these creatures absorb our energy weapons and grow stronger. My finest battle fleets have been reduced to scrap metal. The ethereal military consciousness, a collective entity representing their species' approach to warfare, flickered with patterns that indicated deep confusion. Our energy-based defenses and attacks follow principles that have proven successful for millennia, yet they seem to provide these entities with the very power they need to destroy us. Patricia studied the battle reports with growing understanding. Each alien species had perfected their approach to warfare over thousands of years, creating military traditions that were both incredibly effective and completely predictable. The Void Hunters had learned to counter each species' standard methods because they followed patterns that could be analyzed and defeated. "We need to think differently," Patricia announced. "Commander John Harris will lead our first joint engagement, combining human tactical flexibility with alien technological superiority." John Harris had been studying coalition military doctrine for 3 years, not to copy it, but to understand how it could be improved. The naval officer understood that each alien species brought unique strengths to combat, but they had never learned to combine their abilities in unexpected ways. The test came at the Helix Nebula, where Void Hunter forces had established some kind of staging area among the swirling gas clouds and gravitational anomalies. Coalition long-range sensors detected at least 30 enemy vessels, more than had ever been seen together in one location. "This is our chance to end their threat, once and for all," John announced to his mixed human-alien crew. The bridge of his flagship resembled a miniature United Nations, with officers from 4 different species working together for the first time in coalition history. Zephyrian Tactical Officer Kyle Turn provided telepathic coordination between allied ships, but instead of the rigid formations his species typically used, he followed John's instructions to create fluid patterns that could change instantly based on battlefield conditions. Kraxan weapons specialist Gorthak controlled enough firepower to destroy planets, but he learned to use precision strikes and misdirection rather than overwhelming bombardment. The most challenging integration came from Ethereal Energy Coordinator Lumvara, whose species approached combat as a form of artistic expression. Ethereal tactics emphasized grace and philosophical balance, concepts that seemed incompatible with human military pragmatism until John found ways to blend them into something entirely new. "Begin Operation Chaos Theory," John ordered as the Allied fleet entered the nebula. Instead of approaching the enemy with predictable formations, the mixed force scattered into small groups that seemed to move randomly through the gas clouds. Each group contained ships from different species, creating tactical combinations that had never been attempted before. The Void Hunters responded exactly as expected, deploying countermeasures designed to neutralize Zephyrian coordination, Kraxan, firepower, and ethereal energy manipulation. But they had no response ready for tactics that combined all 3 approaches in ways that defied conventional military logic. "Target the lead cluster with synchronized kinetic bombardment," John commanded, watching as Kraxan missiles guided by Zephyrian telepaths and powered by ethereal energy enhancement struck with devastating effect. The Void Hunter formation collapsed, as their adaptive systems struggled to counter an attack that operated on principles from 3 different military traditions. The battle became a masterclass in adaptive warfare as John's forces constantly shifted tactics and combinations. Where one approach was countered, another took its place before the enemy could adjust. Human unpredictability guided alien precision and power, creating a synergy that proved more effective than any single species' military doctrine. Intelligence Officer Maya Rodriguez worked throughout the engagement to decrypt captured Void Hunter communications. Her background in xenolinguistics and pattern analysis had prepared her for this moment, and what she discovered changed everything the Coalition thought they knew about their enemy. "Admiral, you need to see this," Maya announced during a brief lull in the fighting. "I've cracked their communication protocols, and the translations are disturbing." John studied the data streams flowing across Maya's displays. The Void Hunter communications weren't the chaotic signals expected from an alien invasion force. Instead, they showed organized patterns that suggested artificial intelligence following programmed objectives. "These aren't invaders," Maya explained. "They're machines following directives that were programmed centuries ago. According to their internal communications, they were created by the Coalition itself as some kind of exploration and research project." The implications hit John like a physical blow. "You're saying the Coalition created these things?" "Worse than that," Maya replied grimly. "Based on the command codes buried in their systems, this was a joint project between all three major Coalition powers. They were designed to explore regions beyond the galactic rim and report back on resources and potential threats." "What went wrong?" asked Kyle Turn, his telepathic abilities picking up the horror and guilt radiating from the human officers. Maya pulled up historical records that painted a picture of scientific hubris and political stupidity. "The project was abandoned 300 years ago when the Coalition Council decided it was too expensive to maintain. They simply stopped sending update signals and assumed the exploration drones would eventually run out of power and shut down. Instead, they kept following their last orders," John realized. "Explore and analyze everything they encounter, learning to overcome any obstacles they face." "Including Coalition defenses," Maya confirmed. "They're not trying to conquer the galaxy. They're trying to complete their original mission by studying and cataloging every form of technology and life they encounter. The problem is that their learning protocols interpret any resistance as an obstacle to be overcome. The revelation transformed the entire conflict. The Coalition's most advanced civilizations had created their own worst enemy through a combination of scientific ambition and administrative negligence. The supposedly superior alien cultures had not only failed to anticipate the consequences of their actions, but had then proven incapable of stopping what they had created. John made a decision. That would have been impossible under normal Coalition command structure. "All ships, cease offensive operations. Maya, broadcast a message using the original Coalition command codes. Tell them we're updating their mission parameters." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Void Hunter forces throughout the nebula stopped their attacks and began transmitting requests for new instructions. 3 centuries of destructive behavior ended the moment someone remembered to treat them as Coalition technology rather than enemy invaders. "This is impossible," War Coordinator Silvana protested. "Our finest scientists and military leaders have been trying to stop these creatures for months." "Your finest scientists and military leaders created them," John replied bluntly. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the ones that specialists overlook because they're too complex in their thinking." Battle Commander Torvak was quiet for several minutes before speaking. "The humans succeeded where we failed because they were not trapped by our assumptions about what the enemy represented." The ethereal military consciousness pulsed with patterns indicating profound philosophical disturbance. "We have been fighting ourselves all along, and only the newcomers possessed the clarity to recognize this truth." As the joint fleet returned to Coalition space with a parade of docile Void Hunter vessels following behind them, John understood that everything had changed. The aliens could no longer pretend that humans were primitive observers who had nothing valuable to contribute to galactic civilization. The galaxy's great powers had created a crisis they couldn't solve, and only human adaptability and fresh perspective had provided the solution. More importantly, the collaboration between human innovation and alien technology had proven more effective than any single species approach to warfare. Patricia Kane reviewed the battle reports with satisfaction, mixed with concern. The Coalition Assembly had never been so quiet. President William Brooks stood at the central podium, looking out at representatives from hundreds of species who had gathered to hear humanity's official response to the Void Hunter crisis. The revelation that the galaxy's greatest threat had been created by the Coalition itself had shaken the foundations of galactic civilization. William had been chosen as humanity's spokesperson precisely because he understood both diplomacy and hard truths. The former professor of international relations had spent decades studying how civilizations rose and fell, and he recognized that the galaxy stood at a crucial turning point in its history. "Honored representatives," William began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber's translation systems. "We gather today to discuss not just the resolution of the Void Hunter crisis, but the future of galactic civilization itself." Chancellor Zixathara sat in the Zephyrian section, her crystalline form dim with what humans had learned to recognize as embarrassment. The proud telepathic species had been forced to admit that their supposedly superior intellect had created a threat they couldn't understand or control. Their representatives whispered among themselves in harmonic patterns that the translation system rendered as expressions of uncertainty and doubt. In the Kraxon area, Warlord Vexthal maintained his species' traditional stoic expression, but his four arms remained crossed in a defensive posture. The greatest military power in the galaxy had been defeated by their own abandoned technology, and their warrior pride was struggling to accept this reality. Several younger Kraxon officers had publicly questioned whether their traditional approaches to warfare were still relevant. The ethereal collective occupied their section as shifting patterns of energy that pulsed with what their translators called philosophical distress. High Mind Veltaros had spent weeks in meditation, trying to understand how beings of such supposed wisdom had made such a fundamental error in judgment. Their entire identity as the galaxy's wise guides was being called into question. The Void Hunter crisis has revealed something that many of you may find uncomfortable, William continued. The Coalition's greatest strengths have become its greatest weaknesses. Your species have achieved such mastery in your individual specializations that you have lost the ability to adapt and grow. Murmurs of protest rose from various sections of the assembly. But William pressed on. The Zephyrians perfected telepathic coordination to such a degree that they cannot conceive of communication methods that operate outside their established patterns. The Kraxons developed military doctrines so advanced that they cannot imagine warfare that doesn't follow their rules. The Ethereals achieved such philosophical heights that they cannot see simple solutions to complex problems. Representative Colvex of the Minor Helix Confederation stood to challenge William's assessment. Are you suggesting that advancement and specialization are somehow negative developments? Our civilizations have achieved wonders that your species cannot even comprehend. William nodded respectfully. Your achievements are indeed remarkable, and humanity has learned much from studying them. But achievement can become a trap when it prevents further growth. You have created perfect systems that cannot adapt to unexpected challenges. Admiral Helen Carter entered the assembly chamber at that moment, leading a delegation that included scientists and military officers from the joint task force that had resolved the Void Hunter crisis. Her presence served as a reminder of what collaboration between human adaptability and alien expertise could accomplish. The solution to the Void Hunter problem wasn't discovered through superior technology or ancient wisdom, William explained. It was found by approaching the situation without preconceived notions about what the enemy represented. Human ignorance of your assumptions became an advantage because it allowed us to see possibilities that your expertise had eliminated. Dr. Stephen Walsh stepped forward to present his findings from the Joint Research Project. The xenobiologist had worked with scientists from all major coalition species to understand how the Void Hunters had been created and why they had become such a threat. The original exploration drone project was scientifically sound, Stephen reported. The technology was advanced, the objectives were clear, and the implementation was flawless according to coalition standards. The problem was that no one considered what would happen if the drones continued operating beyond their intended mission parameters. This represents a failure of imagination rather than engineering, added Dr. Maria Santos, who had analyzed the decision-making processes that led to the crisis. Coalition leadership became so confident in their ability to control advanced technology that they stopped planning for unexpected outcomes. High Mind Veltaros pulsed with acknowledgement. Patterns. The humans speak truth that we have been unwilling to face. Our certainty in our own wisdom blinded us to the possibility that we might be wrong. Chancellor Zixthara's crystalline form flickered with what her species considered deep thought. If we accept this analysis, what do you propose as a solution? Should we abandon the systems and methods that have brought us prosperity for millennia? William smiled, recognizing the opening he had been waiting for. Not abandon them, but complement them with approaches that emphasize adaptability and continuous learning. The galaxy needs both stability and change, both expertise and innovation. What does that mean in practical terms? Demanded Battle Commander Torvok, who had replaced Warlord Vexthal as the Kraxan military representative. Admiral Helen Carter activated a holographic display showing the fleet that had defeated the Void Hunters. It means creating integrated teams where human adaptability guides alien capabilities toward solutions that no single species could achieve alone. The Joint Task Force proved that collaboration produces results superior to any individual approach. The display showed tactical analyses of the Helix Nebula engagement, demonstrating how human unpredictability had made Zephyrian coordination more effective, how Kraxan firepower had become more precise when guided by human strategy, and how ethereal energy manipulation had achieved new levels of creativity when freed from traditional patterns. You're proposing a fundamental restructuring of coalition governance and military organization, observed Counselor Nil Thera of the Meridian Alliance. We're proposing evolution, William replied. Natural selection doesn't stop when a species becomes successful. It continues to operate, and species that stop adapting eventually face extinction when conditions change. The assembly erupted in discussions as representatives tried to process the implications of what they were hearing. Some species embraced the concept of renewed growth and adaptation, while others resisted changes to systems that had served them well for thousands of years. Dr. Rachel Green presented the final piece of evidence that would convince the skeptics. Her analysis of Void Hunter technology had revealed capabilities that exceeded anything in coalition databases, achievements that had been accomplished through adaptive learning rather than traditional research and development. The drones didn't just follow their programming, Rachel explained. They improved it, developing new technologies and strategies through trial and error over 3 centuries. They represent what artificial intelligence can accomplish when it's allowed to adapt and grow beyond its original parameters. In other words, William concluded, your abandoned machines became more innovative than their creators because they weren't trapped by assumptions about how things should be done. The vote to establish a new galactic government structure passed by a narrow margin, but it passed nonetheless. The coalition would be transformed into a federation based on principles of collaborative adaptation rather than species hierarchy. Humans would play a central role not as rulers, but as catalysts for innovation and growth. Chancellor Zixthara approached William after the assembly session ended. I find myself both humbled and curious about what comes next. Your species has challenged everything we thought we understood about civilization and progress. That's the point, William replied. The moment we stop being challenged is the moment we stop growing. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy isn't our technology or our wisdom. It's our willingness to admit that we might be wrong and try something different. As delegates from hundreds of worlds began planning for a new form of galactic civilization, William understood that humanity had achieved something remarkable. They had transformed from ignored observers to essential partners not through conquest or superiority, but by teaching the galaxy how to embrace change and uncertainty as tools for growth. The age of static perfection was ending, and the era of adaptive evolution was about to begin. 10 years after the formation of the Galactic Federation, Ambassador Carol Nelson stood in the observation deck of the Orbital Academy above Earth, watching ships from dozens of species arrive with their most promising young minds. The sight still amazed her, not because of the advanced alien technology on display, but because of how eagerly these civilizations now sought to learn from humanity. Carol had been appointed as the first human member of the Supreme Council, but her real achievement was establishing the Interspecies Academy, where human approaches to problem-solving and adaptation had become the foundation of galactic education. Former enemies now sent their children to study on the world they had once dismissed as primitive. Chancellor Frank Robinson walked up beside her, reviewing reports from Academy instructors across the solar system. The former military officer had traded his uniform for academic robes, but his mission remained the same, teaching the galaxy's future leaders how to think beyond the limitations of their species' traditional approaches. Enrollment numbers keep climbing, Frank reported with satisfaction. We have waiting lists from civilizations I've never even heard of, all wanting their young people to study human adaptive methodologies. Through the transparent walls of the observation deck, they could see students from 30 different species working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old coalition system. Zephyrian telepaths learned to communicate with non-telepathic species through methods that emphasized empathy rather than direct mental contact. Craxon warriors studied conflict resolution techniques that achieved victory without violence. Ethereal philosophers practiced applied problem-solving that produced concrete results rather than abstract wisdom. President Susan Parker joined them after completing a meeting with Federation economic advisors. The former businesswoman had been chosen to lead humanity through its transition from galactic newcomers to reluctant guides, and she still struggled with the irony of their situation. The Meridian Trade Conference wants our input on resource allocation disputes, Susan announced. 3 different species are claiming rights to the same asteroid mining operation, and traditional coalition arbitration methods aren't working. Carol smiled, remembering similar situations from humanity's early days in galactic politics. Let me guess, each species is arguing based on their own legal traditions, and none of them can understand why the others don't simply accept their obviously superior approach. Exactly, Susan confirmed. They need someone who can see past cultural assumptions and find solutions that work for everyone involved. Captain Tony Mitchell's voice came through the communications system from the flagship of the Federation fleet. The massive vessel orbited nearby, serving as both a symbol of the new galactic order and a practical demonstration of how human innovation could enhance alien technology. President Parker, we're receiving requests for assistance from the Outer Rim Development Project, Tony reported. They're trying to establish colonies in systems that the old coalition considered too challenging for settlement. The Outer Rim Project represented everything the new Federation stood for. Instead of avoiding difficult environments, human colonization, specialists worked with alien engineers to develop adaptive solutions that turned obstacles into opportunities. Worlds that had been written off as uninhabitable were becoming thriving communities through approaches that emphasized flexibility over brute force engineering. Tell them we'll have teams ready within the week, Susan replied. And make sure They include representatives from at least 5 different species. The whole point is collaboration, not human dominance. Carol appreciated Susan's careful attention to galactic politics. Humanity's rise to influence had created concerns among some species that they were simply replacing one form of dominance with another. The key to maintaining stability was ensuring that human leadership remained focused on enabling others rather than controlling them. Dr. Jennifer Hayes materialized on the observation deck through the Academy's Advanced Transportation System. The research director had been working with alien scientists to develop technologies that combined the best insights from multiple civilizations, and her projects regularly produced breakthroughs that amazed even veteran researchers. "The latest collaboration results are remarkable," Jennifer announced, activating a holographic display showing industrial facilities scattered across Federation space. Zephyrian crystal technology enhanced by Kraxon manufacturing precision and guided by human adaptive design principles is producing materials we never thought possible. The display showed mining operations that adapted to local conditions in real time, manufacturing centers that could switch between different product lines without retooling, and transportation networks that routed themselves based on changing demand patterns rather than fixed schedules. More importantly, Jennifer continued, the species involved are learning to think beyond their traditional limitations. Zephyrian engineers are experimenting with non-crystalline materials. Kraxon manufacturers are embracing flexibility over standardization, and ethereal theorists are testing their concepts through practical applications. Frank pulled up education statistics that showed similar trends throughout the academy system. Student performance increases dramatically when they're taught to combine their species' natural strengths with adaptive methodologies. We're not replacing their abilities, we're helping them evolve beyond self-imposed limitations. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to the academy, each representing different aspects of how the galaxy had changed since humanity's ascension to influence. Former coalition officials who had once mocked human primitiveness now sought advice on managing complex interspecies disputes. Military commanders, who had dismissed human tactics as chaotic, now studied adaptive warfare as an essential skill. Captain Lisa Morgan arrived from the exploration fleet with reports from the galaxy's edge, where Federation expeditions were making discoveries that would have been impossible under the old system. Her mixed-species crews approached unknown phenomena with combinations of caution and curiosity that produced better results than either pure aggression or excessive hesitation. "We've made contact with 3 new civilizations this month," Lisa reported. "Instead of immediately trying to integrate them into existing power structures, we're learning about their unique capabilities and finding ways to benefit from their perspectives." "Any promising developments?" Carol asked, always interested in how first contact procedures had evolved since humanity's own introduction to galactic civilization. "The resonance builders from the Vega sector have architectural techniques that could revolutionize space station construction," Lisa replied. "The symbiotic collective near the galactic core has biological technologies that make our medical advances look primitive. Most importantly, they're all interested in joining the Federation because they see it as an opportunity for growth rather than absorption." Evening brought the weekly council meeting where human leaders reviewed their responsibilities and planned for challenges that seemed to grow more complex as the Federation expanded. The burden of leadership weighed heavily on people who had never expected to guide galactic civilization, but they understood that their unique perspective made them essential to the galaxy's continued evolution. "Sometimes I wonder if we're moving too fast," Susan admitted as they reviewed expansion reports. 10 years ago, we were ignored observers, and now half the galaxy looks to us for guidance on everything from trade disputes to military strategy." "That's exactly why we're the right choice," Carol replied. "Any other species would have become comfortable with their position and stopped questioning whether they were making the right decisions. We're still uncertain enough to keep learning and adapting." Tony's voice came through the communication system with the evening security report. "All Federation sectors are stable. But I'm seeing some concerning developments in regions that haven't joined us yet. The old coalition powers are struggling to maintain order using traditional methods, and some of their member species are requesting Federation assistance, which means we'll probably face pressure to expand faster than we're comfortable with, Frank observed. Success creates its own problems. Then we solve those problems the same way we've solved everything else, Jennifer said confidently, by admitting we don't have all the answers and working with others to find better solutions. As the meeting ended and the participants prepared to return to their various responsibilities, Carol looked out at the stars and reflected on humanity's incredible journey. The species that had been mocked for its primitive nature now guided galactic civilization toward a more dynamic and resilient future, but the real victory wasn't humanity's rise to power. The real victory was that the galaxy had learned to value diversity, adaptability, and the courage to question established wisdom. Species that had remained unchanged for millennia were now embracing change and growth as essential aspects of civilization. The universe had become a place where innovation was valued over tradition, where cooperation was stronger than dominance, and where the willingness to admit uncertainty was seen as a sign of wisdom rather than weakness.